Today, what we want to talk about is the brain, but in relationship to the mind. So it's really like this idea of rewiring the brain to change the mind. There's this great book called Buddha's Brain, and there's an adage in it that says, we change the mind to change the brain to change the mind. And what that's saying is when we get control over what flows through our awareness, when we have control over like what we pay attention to, that literally it has a biochemical correlation, every single thought, a biochemical correlation in the brain. And when you change the connections, the neurosynaptic connections within the brain, you change and influence the mind and how you see future events. And so like the question for you is like, have you found the off button? Can you stop thinking at will? For most of us, we would say no. In fact, it feels like just the opposite. Like we have zero control, like compulsively thinking about this and that and the other. And there's good reason for it. We'll elaborate it later on about like the evolution of the brain and why we think the way we think and like the priorities of the brain and what it's every day focusing on and how we can change that. We talked a little bit about it, but today what's important is just to understand that there's a patterning of consciousness. Or another way of saying that is there are patterns of thought that you have that influence how you see the world. And so if we're talking like about waking up and like really taking ownership of our lives and the direction that they're going, we have to bring into the equation what's influencing the decisions that we make moment by moment. And so here's a little an idea for you. Past experiences influence present perception. What does that mean? That we have all lived our lives in certain ways and like the way we were brought up, our family, our mom, our dad, our caregivers, where you lived and like what state and the community and the neighborhood and what activities you did, they all shape how we see our life. So literally, past experiences influence like how I see a situation right now. So another way of saying that is we've been conditioned to view the world in very specific ways. And when a present circumstance comes up, it can trigger those conditioned ways of being. Another way of describing this is we have a conscious mind and a subconscious mind. The subconscious mind runs completely off of patterns. You have read books long enough, words long enough, sentences long enough to have such a conditioned pattern to be able to read an entire page and then at the end of it, recognize that you don't remember a word that you just read. And you know for sure that you read every word. What was happening is that you have just conditioned yourself to have such a pattern, a pattern to be able to read that you can do it on the subconscious level. So you can be thinking about something and all of a sudden you're still reading. You can be, in the very same way, you can drive a car and eat a sandwich. Remember when you first started driving a car though? Like everything, your whole body system was like on point. Like I am looking and checking, especially if it was like a stick shift, you had to stick and like drive and it was like you couldn't do anything else but drive. You've gotten to a point where you've wired that pattern so deeply into your brain and body that you can now start doing other things, not suggested, but you can like call somebody, you can like have a conversation, you can text, I can talk to my children and carry on and like play music and all this stuff. Like you can literally start quick switching, like focusing your attention on different things other than driving, and your subconscious will keep you in the lines. Now, all of that, you're like, great, who cares? All right, brushing your teeth. I have a pattern of brushing my teeth. I start on the left, I go to the right, I go top, I go bottom, I go front, I go back. No big deal. Now, what happens is those patterns don't just stop on like the not so big deal. I can read a page without really reading it. I can drive a car without really. That's a little more important because lives are at stake here. So check in while you're driving a car or brush your teeth. But these very same things are true when it comes to how we react to situations in our lives that do mean something, that do affect how we feel, that do influence the decisions that we make, because those decisions are creating our destiny. So the question then becomes, how do we get more control over the decisions that we make? If it's true that when we're checked out, like meaning when we're not focusing, the subconscious patterning is taking like the lead. It's driving the car, so to speak. Then the question is, are we truly living our lives to the best of our ability for the betterment of our future selves? Because if our present perception influences present actions, but those present perceptions are dependent on past experiences, then our present actions influence future perceptions. So it's this huge feedback loop where if we're not focusing and making deliberate, conscious decisions in real time right now, then what happens is we just become this repetitious cycle, like this bundle of reflexive habits of like just repeating the same things over and over and over again, feeling like we have free will, but actually what's really happening is we're just repeating and doing the same things we've always done because they're comfortable, right? So, and this is everywhere. I think, not all patterns are created equal. Like I talked about reading a book, like, okay, big deal, who cares? But like for me, one of the biggest patterns I had growing up was this deeply held resentment towards my dad, right? And so literally like, that experience of me like not being okay with the decisions that he made in his life, it left two like really big things. One, I hated him. I resented him for a really long time. And two, I was only 2 years old when it happened, three, and it left this kind of like hole inside of me that felt unlovable. Like I felt like he rejected me because of how he left and the lack of communication. And so here's this past experience. So he perpetually forgot my birthdays. So it was always like a week after he would call and say, happy birthday, Chris. I'm like, yeah, it was a week ago, Dad. And I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. But it would piss me off. And so I started living my life through this filter of a resentment that I held towards my dad. And so the action, how I'm receiving present moment situations, like here's a case in point, how it manifested was in my relationships. Because I was like, had this like very deeply seated fear of rejection, right? I would attract these women into my life that there was a period of time where like all three of them left me for their ex-boyfriend without telling me. Right? And so I was, and we'll talk about this later with the idea of law of attraction and manifestation, but I was attracting these relationships into my life. I was seeing them, like the pattern of my fear of rejection that was playing out in my brain was being experienced within the relationship, and then all of a sudden I was needing them to be a certain way to fulfill and to like stay with me so I never have to feel that rejection again that I like was still holding on with my dad. Right? This is serious stuff. Like this is a serious pattern that had like very, very challenging and negative consequences in my life in my like teen years and my early 20s. And so the question is like, how do we overcome those patterns? And another way of like simplifying it without the heaviness of my story is like, we all have it. You have a pattern of reacting to being late. You have a pattern of reacting to traffic jams. We have a pattern of like frustration or anger or like resentment, all this stuff, all these emotional affects that don't serve us end up being functions of past experiences. Now, those past experiences can be wired over time where you do an action over and over and over again for it to be embedded in the subconscious. They can also be like one traumatic event, right? For me, it was my dad leaving, right? And that event like changed the way I saw the world forever. So the question is, how do we overcome that, right? And first, you got to be aware of it, right? You got to be aware of the cycles. And then you got to have the ability to control your impulses to react a certain way, to make a certain decision. Because like I said, if decisions create our destiny, how do we gain control in the moment of life to make better decisions? So that I'm not just repeating old ways of being born from past experiences, but I'm actually being creative in the moment, choosing the responses that will direct my life in a direction so that I'm a better version of myself. I'm growing in ways, I'm emotionally maturing in ways, I'm mentally like focused to be able to keep my eye on the prize of where I want to go in my life. And so this is why, how do you rewire the brain? It's meditation. Right? And I'll go over this really quickly because we're going to go deeper later, but the three major benefits of meditation. Because you may be asking yourself, Chris, that sounds like it's a hard story. Maybe you can relate to like parents. I think like during like people around my age that were like grew up in a period where there was like, I think most of them are like divorced, most families have been broken at that point. So you may be able to relate to that. And then the question becomes, how did meditation help you deal with that? Well, it's because the 3 major benefits of meditation, the first is awareness, right? It was funny because for a period of time, like the resentment just felt like it was me. Like, this is just me. I'm resentful to him because he's an asshole and he did what like no father should ever do, which is leave 6 children and a mom to fend for themselves, right? And at like that awareness, of course I was aware, but I wasn't aware of like the pain that I was holding until like there was a specific moment, I won't tell you the story, where it became so apparent to me that that resentment was killing me. And at that point, I had to then make a choice. The impulse to continue the resentment every time my birthday came up, to hate them and to be like, oh, to be frustrated, to like literally not like my birthdays because of the pain that I felt. That was an impulse to feel that and then to act it out and to dwell in the misery of that. Like, if I didn't have the awareness of like, whoa, the awareness embedded in that is like, oh wait, I have a choice. And then the impulse control happens because you're like, oh, if I have a choice and I have space to make that choice, well, what would I choose if I was choosing my higher self? If I was choosing to grow into the better version of myself? If I was choosing to be more at peace, to be more forgiving, what would I do then? Right? And so impulse control is so important because this is where the rubber meets the road about our destiny. If I can make better decisions by having more control over my impulses to just react, then I can actually guide my life in the direction that I want to see it and not just feel like I'm stuck in these old patterns. Right? Empathy for me in this situation was really important because then I had to realize that, man, if I were him, like if I just put myself in his shoes, then maybe I would understand his decisions better. And that's actually what happened. I had to actually sit down and talk to him and be like, hey, Dad, I hated you forever. Like, what's up? Like, why did you leave? What did you do? And we had a period of time where he told me all of his decisions. And there was a period where I was like, man, I understand now. Right? And so this process, meditation, the ability to have awareness, to control your impulses, and to stand in someone else's shoes is what's born from this practice. It's so important. So it comes back to when I can focus my mind and control what flows through the awareness, I can then restructure my brain, which will influence how I see future events. Period. That's really the core of it. So the question then becomes, how do you meditate, and what does success in meditation look like? Well, let me go over how to meditate real quick. So you have a couple different options here. The easiest is, if you've never meditated before, to grab a chair. This will be my makeshift chair. And if you have a back on it, as you sit down, just make sure you're not leaning back. The key is knees in line with the hips or below. So if this chair was higher and my hips were higher, that would be even better, because there's less of an angle here, which will cause less tension over time as we start to increase the length of time that we're going to be meditating, right? The other aspect of it is just straight spine. That means the low belly pulls in, the front ribs draw back, the shoulder blades hug towards the spine, and then the hands are in a position where the elbows can be right underneath the shoulders. Beyond that, the head is neutral, so you're not leaning forward to it, the forward head tilt, or back too much. You're in this nice neutral position. A straight spine creates an alert mind. That's super important. Once you've got the seat, this is what, when we first started meditating, our meditation teacher suggested. All Westerners just sit in a chair. You know, sitting in lotus position or any other crazy yoga pose isn't going to make you more spiritual or get you to meditation any faster. But I do, at home, have a meditation cushion. And so this is what it looks like. This is a Zafu and a Zabaton, I think. Maybe it's reverse. But you can grab one of these, or if you have blocks, and you can take a seat. One option is to just cross the legs. What I'd like you to notice is, again, hips and knees level. Kind of different from that angle, but just trust me that the knees and the hips are level, or my knees are a little below. But then everything else, spine straight. All right. Once you've got that, then it's eyes closed. I'll turn to face you. Your eyes are closed. Right? Your eye gaze is focused, and you're just focusing on your breath. Your anchor, meditation has a lot of different anchors. Some anchors are like a mantra, some anchors are like the environment. The easiest and the most effective is the breath. And so what we're going to do is just a breathing technique where you're going to inhale for a count of 4, hold at the top for a count of 4, and then exhale for a count of 4. It's called triangle breath. And what we're going to do is inhale, and you're going to count, like inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold the breath for 1, 2, 3, 4, and exhale for 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you'll inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4. Your counting won't be out loud, you'll just be internal. Right? If you have been meditating for a while, you have a different anchor, feel free to use it. But the easiest, the simplest is breath and counting the breath. And this triangle with the breath hold allows the brain to get more involved in the process. So that's the meditation. Spine straight, eyes closed, and just count the breath. We'll talk about the mission in a little bit, but let me get back to this real quick. So all of a sudden, you're going to be sitting, you're going to be meditating. And within a moment, probably less than a moment, I don't know if you can get any less than a moment, a couple seconds, you are going to be lost in thought. Literally, you're going to be breathing, you're like, okay, I'm into this, I'm going to breathe, I'm going to count, and all of a sudden, boom, you're gone. You won't be aware that you're gone initially, you're just going to be thinking. And thinking's become so normal, you're going to be like, nothing's out of the ordinary, I'm just going to keep thinking. But you're not going to think that, because then you'd be aware of your thought. This is the point. You're going to be breathing, and then you're going to be lost in thought. And then when you're lost in thought, there's going to be a moment where you're aware that you're thinking and not focusing on your breath. That is the victory. That is the victory. That's what you want. You're going to look at it, most people, if this is newer for you, as you just failed because you were lost in thought and you were supposed to be breathing. But the victory is in catching yourself. That's what we're cultivating, awareness of where the mind actually is. And then impulse control, saying, oh, you know what? My impulse was to keep thinking, but I'm actually going to control my awareness and come back to my breath. That's the victory. If you want to build this, you put weight in the hand and you do curls. If you want to build this, you say focus your attention to one point, in this case the breath, and when your mind goes away and you catch it, that's the repetition. You do that 100, 1,000 times in any given meditation, and you are building your capacity to pay closer attention, to focus, so that you can control how you react, or a better way of saying it, how you respond to the events of your life, so that you can direct it in a way that helps you grow into the person you want to be. So that is the core. The mission today is to meditate for 5 minutes. Now we're adding this. Again, we're going to layer these missions so that you're beginning to practice the formula. So right now, mission 1 was to drink 20 ounces of water every morning. Continue to do that. Mission 2 was to move, do that mini flow for 5 minutes in the morning. Remember the seat to cat and cow, to walk it out and down dog, to forward fold, to sweep high, star catchers, hands to prayer. Right after that, we're now adding this. 5 minutes of meditation in triangle breath, where you're inhaling for 4, holding for 4, exhaling for 4. Put a timer on. Find a place in your house where it's really simple. Right after you move, you sit down, you set your timer, and you're off. 5 minutes, triangle breathing, inhale 4, hold 4, exhale 4. So this is the next thing. So we've changed our state with movement, and now we're going to focus the mind and begin to gain awareness and impulse control and empathy over a period of time. 5 minutes, not much to ask for, but we're starting to layer this Awaken Life formula together, and it is a game changer. These 2 practices, and the third one that's to come is like we've had people that are just like, how have I not been doing this my whole life? It is completely changed every single day because I am focused and I know what I'm going for and I know how to get there as I start my day. It's literally a recipe to win the day. So I thank you for your attention. And we will see you in the next session.